Good morning, friends. Let's begin with a prayer today. Divine Mother, Heavenly Father, friend, beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Shri Yukteswar, and our beloved Guru, Paramahansa Yogananda, saints of all religions, humbly we bow at thy feet. Help us to feel your cosmic energy flowing through our thoughts, flowing through our bodies, that we may tune in to thy will. Help us to love with your strength, to act with your wisdom, and to uplift our consciousness, that we may live in union with thee. Guide thou our every movement, that we may be in tune with thy will. Om. Peace. Amen.
I look for thee night and day, night and
The affirmation that we get to explore this week, along with Swami Kriyananda, is the quality of willpower. And willpower truly is, for those of us that are spiritually seeking, for those of us that are on a pathway toward truth, willpower truly is a linchpin. It's part of the overall process, the overall process in this journey toward truth, toward revealing our oneness, returning to that state of consciousness where we remember and we know that we are one with God. We can't do that without willpower, because our willpower directs our flow of energy. And as we know, this world is made up of energy. It's all God's cosmic, divine prana and life force that's flowing through everything, animating all of reality, animating ourselves, animating our own thoughts and actions, not just moving our body or creating material structures in the world, but it's a part of the circumstances that happen in the world, the energetic realities of the world, the thoughts and opinions, spoken words, all of it is part of God's divine Leela, this animation of prana, of life force that's flowing through everything. And that cosmic consciousness is always available to us. We always have that opportunity to grab it, to reach up toward it, to feel it, and to allow that to help us to redirect our energy, because everything is energy. So for those of us on the spiritual path who are seeking that truth, the reason that willpower becomes such a vital aspect, it really is a linchpin in that process, is because where our willingness is directed, where our desires and our wants and our longings are directed, is where the energy follows. So that essential question, the one true question that matters most on the spiritual path, am I directing my energy inward and upward toward God, toward that place of Christ consciousness in the body, that center of spirituality in our own bodily, physical body? Am I redirecting that energy in and up, or am I allowing that energy to be directed down and out into the world, into the material aspects of the world through the senses? This is why Yogananda says to us when we're meditating to cut off the sense telephones, to drop the body and cut off those sense telephones. It's not because seeing, smelling, tasting, touching, anything like that in itself is negative, but it's because we experience the world through sense-based sensations. And so the more that we are connected with that relationship between what we're feeling, tasting, touching, smelling, whatever it may be, the more that we're connected with that relationship, the more we're drawn out into the world. And the ego loves to be out in the world. But what we're trying to do is shift that energy, to redirect it inward and upward, to drop the body, to use our techniques to draw that energy into subtler and subtler aspects of that flow, until we can just barely feel that subtle flow of energy lifting it up. It's not getting caught up and entangled in the world around us. I was listening to a podcast yesterday while I was on a run, and it was exploring contemplative lifestyles in the modern world. So it was sort of contemporary contemplative, if you want to call it that. And the podcast runs through a series of academics and spiritual teachers and just different people who have dedicated their lives to spirituality and contemplative practices in one form or another. And the particular interviewee that I was listening to on this day has written a number of books in the academic setting about the archetype of the monk. And that's the word that they were using, the archetype of the monk. And really this idea of why, on a soul level, everybody resonates with that feeling of withdrawing in, of enjoying the silence, of seeking the divine. Of course, we know this to be true. Those of us that are watching this webinar today are probably familiar with Yogananda and his teachings in some form or another, and we already know this to be true, that the soul's true nature is that relationship of divinity, is that true identity as being one with God. So the archetype of the monk that we're all longing and craving for, it makes sense to each one of us. And she had a really lovely line in the midst of the interview that she was giving, or that she was engaging in. And she said that we don't fall in love or bear witness to love or give love. She says that we become intertwined and entangled in love. And in a way, I stopped and thought about that for a few minutes when I heard the line. Or I didn't stop, but I just stopped. I paused the podcast and thought about it for a few moments while I was listening to it. And in essence, I really thought that it is the truth. We become entangled in love because love is not a one-way relationship. Giving our longing, our desire, our hearts to somebody or something. It doesn't always have to be a person. It can be an object or a cause or a profession, whatever it may be. But when we're giving ourselves to something with all of that longing and all of that desire, we become entangled in it. It's not a one-way relationship. And the same is true for God's grace. God's grace is ever present, always flowing around us. But it's not a one-way relationship. It doesn't just descend on us and we sit back and wait for it to come. We have to give of ourselves as well. We have to give of ourselves into that relationship until we become entangled in God's love. And this is the essence. That's why I chose the chant that we chanted today for willpower. It didn't at first resonate, door of my heart. How does that resonate with willpower? But really, willpower, if we strip it back, is talking about our longing, our heart's desire. Because where there is a will, there's a way. Where there is will, energy is quick to follow. And that's what Swami Kriyananda talks to us about in the summary that he gives of this particular quality. So let's read this quality together and then we'll talk a bit more. Willpower. Willpower, and not the vague abstraction of luck, is the secret to true achievement. Willpower on subtle energy levels generates what only looks like luck, by magnetically attracting to us opportunities. Our will is strengthened by removing from our minds the no-saying tendencies, the obstructions of doubt, of laziness, and of fear. Yes, even the fear of success. Willpower is developed by persevering to the conclusion of whatever one attempts. One should start first with little undertakings, then proceed to bigger ones. Infinite willpower comes from harnessing the little human will to God's infinite, all-powerful consciousness. I'm going to read that last line again. Infinite willpower comes from harnessing the little human will to God's infinite, all-powerful consciousness. Our willingness, our willpower, our ability to direct our energy toward a cause is vital on the spiritual path. Paramahansa Yogananda said that accomplishing self-realization, that the search for self-realization and the ultimate remembrance of who we truly are is 25% the effort of the disciple, 25% the effort of the guru, and 50% the grace of God. And so on one hand, we can sit back and say, great, I only am responsible for 25%. Let me just sit back and wait for God's grace to descend. But Yogananda goes on to say that 25% is actually 100% effort and willingness on the part of the devotee. So we have to give all of ourselves, everything that we are, into the search for the divine, into the surrender of the ego, the surrender to God's will. And that becomes the 25% of the equation that helps our soul to remember our true identity, to remember that we are one with the divine. In this podcast that I was listening to yesterday, as I said, there were many things that were lovely. The woman who was being interviewed was lovely, and she had really wonderful things to say about contemplative lifestyles. And really, one of the first questions that she was asked was, what does contemplative mean to you? And she spoke to what we at Ananda would call inner communion. So I think, in the world, the contemporary term is contemplative, but at Ananda, I think we use that word contemplative really to mean inner communion, at least in the way that this interviewee was describing it, because it's really about drawing the energy in and having a personal experience and a personal connection with the divine. That there are rituals and traditions and organizations that can help to support our search for spirituality. We can go to a temple and perform religious rites, or we can listen to beautiful talks on the divine. We can hear Swami Kriyananda's music. That all of that is going to help us in whatever aspect of the outer experience of spirituality that we can use to help us to remember and to draw that energy in, is something that we can and should lean into. But ultimately, it's inner communion. It's that personal experience, that firsthand experience of connecting with the divine that each one of us is seeking and that each one of us is craving. So when we listen to Swami Kriyananda's music and it uplifts our consciousness and that vibration brings us into higher and higher states of awareness, then we're having an experience of oneness with the divine. And that's ultimately what we're seeking in contemplative or in lifestyles, or in inner communion, if that's the word that we would use more often here at Ananda. And in the midst of describing that, this lovely definition of what contemplative meant to her, there was one moment that I didn't agree with, which is when she said that reaching toward those states, those states of contemplation, reaching toward that contemplative lifestyle is a passive act. It's an act of surrender. And it is true that inner communion is in fact an act of surrender, surrendering to God's will and surrendering to surrendering the ego's pull. That's not a passive state. In fact, what Paramahansa Yogananda teaches us is that it takes great dynamic energy and great will and focus and concentration in order to reach up to those higher states of awareness. In order to surrender the ego, we have to give all of who we are into that fight, into that struggle to drop the ego, to drop the body, to disconnect the sense telephones, because the world is drawing us out. It's dualistic by nature. It's always saying, come here, come, look at this beautiful thing that we have. Don't you want this? Don't you want to be rich and wealthy? Don't you want a wonderful family? Wouldn't you like a nicer car? And we stop and we say, sure, that would be nice. And yeah, let me take a little bit of that. But to actually work toward surrendering the ego, to actually work toward cutting off that connection of energy, that channel of energy or force of energy, that's the word I was looking for, that force of energy that's drawing us down and out into the world, it takes great dynamic concentration and willpower. And that's what that's what Swami Kriyananda is saying to us right here. It's the second equation. So I gave us the first equation, 25% the disciple, 25% the guru, 50% God's grace. And the second mathematical equation that Yogananda gives us, this one isn't quite mathematical because it's not numbers. The greater the will, the greater the flow of energy. The greater the flow of energy, the greater the magnetism. Swami Kriyananda, in The Art and Science of Raja Yoga, after he repeats these lines from Yogananda, he goes on to say, he says, repeat this every day, emblazon it on your minds. This single thought will revolutionize your life. What a promise. The greater the will, the greater the flow of energy. The greater the flow of energy, the greater the magnetism. Because where our concentration, where our desire, where our longing is directed, the energy follows. And where the energy follows, ultimately all of our being heads in that direction. Ultimately all of our qualities of power, concentration, desire, determination, integrity, it follows that thread. And so that's what Swami Kriyananda is saying to us at the beginning of our affirmation here, when he says that willpower is not a vague abstraction of luck, though it can appear that way. It's really a mathematical equation on the law of magnetism. If I pick one thing in my life and I give it deep concentration and focus, let's say I really want a new, nice, fancy car. It's a fancy car. Like a Ferrari. So let's say I really, really want a new, nice, fancy car, and I spend years obsessing over it, contemplating it, thinking about how to get it, ordering magazines where I get to look at pictures of it, putting a poster up on the wall. My heart's desire gets deeper and deeper and deeper for that Ferrari. Pretty soon I'll probably magnetize the energy and the willingness in order to receive that Ferrari. And it can seem like abstract luck, but it's not. It's actually a connection. The law of magnetism, if I'm putting the energy out, if I'm putting the willpower and the energy out in that direction, then I will probably magnetize that which I am seeking. And we can see this in many aspects. You know, there's a story of Swami Kriyananda who was reading a newspaper one morning, and there was an advertisement for a new film that was coming out. And in the advertisement, it was like a big half-page or quarter-page advertisement with the face of the actress, whomever the star of the film was. And he was looking at it, and she was, you know, I mean, she was an actress, so she had all of those qualities of sensuality and beauty and magnetism that comes along with attracting a career like that. And he just noted to whomever else was in the room with him that it must have taken her lifetimes in order to cultivate the magnetism to live out this life as an actress. It must have taken lifetimes to cultivate the magnetism that would draw the attractions, both the beauty, the sensuality, the talent, the karma, all of those things in order to ultimately get what she wanted. I mean, just stop and think about that. Spending lifetimes, lifetime after lifetime after lifetime, obsessing over this one fantasy, this one idea, this one quality of wanting to be desired and adored and loved in the way that most actresses or some famous actresses are and can be in our lives. The law of magnetism is subtle, but it's there. And that's what's rooted in that law of magnetism is willpower, where our heart's desire is going. What if instead of obsessing over that Ferrari or that new job or becoming an actress in this lifetime, we directed all of that focus and attention back up to the divine? Again, the law of magnetism is certain. The greater the will, the greater the flow of energy. The greater the flow of energy, the greater the magnetism. If we cultivate and focus and concentrate all of that energy on the search for the divine, then of course it's inevitable that we must find success, that we must achieve that success, which is the second part of what Swami Kriyananda says here, where he says that, you know, our will is strengthened by removing from our minds the no-saying tendencies of doubt, of laziness, of fear, that when we can be strong and clear and stalwart in our devotion, in our focus, then we can open our hearts to possibilities that we never knew possible. Again, why I came back to this chant today, door of my heart. Purifying the heart's desires, because the heart is where desire lives. So the crux of that linchpin, of that willpower that's going to draw us down and out into the world, or inward and up toward the divine, it exists in the heart's feelings, in those vrittis and karmic imprints that are waiting there to be cleansed and to be purified. And we know through chanting, through meditation, through Kriya Yoga, we can expedite that process of purification. We can expedite that process of cutting the sense telephones and the ego's ties and bounds to the worldly obsessions that we have. And it doesn't mean that we withdraw from the world. It simply means our desire is no longer connected to the world. Our definition of happiness, our definition of self is no longer connected to those external labels, identifications, things that we have. Paramahansa Yogananda, I'll leave us with just one last thought today. Paramahansa Yogananda said that one of the highest prayers that we can pray is, I will reason, I will, and I will act. But guide thou my reason, will, and activity toward the highest good in everything. And that echoes the line that Swami Kriyananda leaves us with in this description of willpower, when he says, infinite willpower comes from harnessing the little human will to God's infinite, all-powerful consciousness. And that word harnessing sticks out to me. It doesn't say infinite willpower comes from attaching, or it doesn't say comes from gaining God's infinite will. It's harnessing. Again, 25% the disciple, 25% the guru, 50% the grace of God. We have to bring all of our dynamic willingness, all of our energy and concentration and focus into the search for God. And when we can harness our willpower, when we can harness our focus and our concentration with that flow of cosmic consciousness, which is always uplifting, which is always drawing us into higher and higher states of awareness, when we can harness our energy and our willpower to that flow of divine grace, that upward flow, then we are able to access that limitless flow of energy and of willpower into God's infinite, all-powerful consciousness, which is where we ultimately want to be. And that's where this prayer comes back, and it's so important. I will reason, I will, and I will act. I will engage in the world. I will move through the world and make decisions and strive to uplift in every single moment, in every aspect of my life. Strive toward upliftment of consciousness. Strive toward higher and higher states of awareness. Share your will, your divine light, to share God in every moment. That doesn't mean we walk into the workplace and say, well, you know, if you were seeking God, you would do it this way. But opening up people's perspectives and bringing in the qualities and the aspects of the divine. How can we be more compassionate? How can we cultivate peace, joy, power, awareness that's uplifted? How can we help to expand in every moment? When we're acting through God's will, I will reason, I will, and I will act, but guide thou my reason, will, and activity toward the highest good in everything. That highest good is the upliftment of consciousness, the upliftment of awareness. Anything that opens our heart, door of my heart, open wide, I keep for thee. Purify the heart so that our longings don't get attached to the worldly matters. We can engage in the world. We can be in the world, but not of it. But we can give 100% of our energy and effort and willingness up to the divine, up to that search for God. In every moment, I will reason, will, and act with your guidance, with your words, with your thoughts, with your energy whispering in my mind. Help me to uplift every circumstance in my life. Help me to uplift every interaction in my life. This is the prayer that we can pray. I will be an instrument of your divine peace until there is no more I, until it's just your grace flowing through me. This is where we're all headed, and this is the power of concentrating our willpower. So let's end today by repeating our affirmation just once or twice. You can repeat it along with me, closing your eyes and concentrating deeply at the point between the eyebrows, that center of Christ consciousness, of expanded awareness. That we hold in our own bodies. So offering that energy up, concentrating deeply, let's practice this affirmation on willpower. My will is to do that which is right to do. Part all ye mountains that stand in my way. Nothing can stop my progress. My will is to do that which is right to do. Part all ye mountains that stand in my way. Nothing can stop my progress. Once more with deep, deep concentration, taking this into that inner experience, taking the words and the vibration and the energy of this affirmation into that place of inner stillness, to truly affirm our willpower, where we are directing our motivations and our energy. My will is to do that which is right to do. Part all ye mountains that stand in my way. Nothing can stop my progress. And with our eyes closed, let's listen to the prayer. O infinite power, I will use my will, but guide thou my will in everything I do, that it reflect thy will. Let us harness our willpower to that of God's divine infinite consciousness until we are living in that state of directing our energy, our concentration, our focus toward that which is right to do, toward the upliftment of everything, toward the remembrance of God in every moment, helping not only our own soul on that journey homeward to remember truth, but to share that truth with all whom we meet. God bless you.